Hi, everybody, and welcome to this latest edition of A Justice Seeking Church here at Shoreline Methodist Community. In last week's episode, Charity was talking about hope and how hope is defiant. Hope brings tenacity. Hope is what can really encourage us to bring about this justice in our whole world. So what does that look like for you? How are you discovering answers to this eternal question? What is mine to do? The conversation continues. So I'm going to introduce this week's guest. Let's welcome Kerry. Hi, Kerry. How are you doing?
Hi, Ryan. I'm good. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's absolutely fabulous. Now, I ask all of our fabulous Methodist officers just to explain, you got a grand title. What is this title? What does it mean?
It's a great title, isn't it, Wayne? Look how much space it takes up on the screen.
Absolutely.
Incredible. So it's a fascinating title, Connectional Faith-Rooted Community Organising Officer. And I sometimes get folks saying, oh, organising, are you in charge of keeping things tidy? Are you going to tidy the church cupboards for us, Kerry? You develop a system? And I have to say, my goodness, no. I learned very early on as a lay worker, as a probationer deacon, that is not the way to go if you want to be popular. So this is about my role. It's quite a new role. I've been in this post since the 1st of March. I'm still based at home in Lichfield in Staffordshire. Come to London a couple of days a week, which is where I am now. And I am responsible for implementing and embedding the practices of faith-rooted community organising in the Methodist Church. So in 3 areas, for our established churches, for our new places for new people, and in really helping us move from vision into action around our work of a justice-seeking church.
Okay. So what does that look like then?
So community organising is something which has a really long history. It was a part of how early Methodism grew and flourished. These are practices and ways of working that emerged from the grassroots up. This isn't a kind of a top-down thing that we're asking people to take on a new. People, as I talk about organising, recognise that these are the things that we're often doing already through the way we gather, pray, worship together, seek to build relationships in our community. So the simplest definition of community organising that I can offer is that it is about intentionally building relationships with people in our churches and our wider community so that we can gather together around the issues that we have recognised really matter to us, the things which we think might be ours to do, and use our collective power together to act for change and transformation. And when we talk about faith-rooted community organising, we're just recognising that we're doing this in a way that is deeply rooted in our Christian faith and particularly in our Methodist tradition, because as I mentioned already, these are the ways in which we can see our early Methodist churches, our chapels up and down the country beginning to grow and flourish because they're so embedded in deep relationship together and in their wider community.
Yeah. A few weeks ago, Inderjit Bogle was talking about extravagant love, extravagant hospitality. And I have a great quote from Martin Joseph where he talks in one of his songs. I've referenced it lots of times. Serving tea in a cup of love. And that. And I think there is so much in our heritage that we can and need to learn from. Going right back to know what was it about that early part of Methodism that had such an impact. And as you say, it was just stemming out of people's response to the gospel in their communities. I do. I think our future lies in our past. But okay. So what does hope look like in amongst all of this?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'm finding, and I don't know about you, Wayne, or folk listening in, that it's really easy at the minute to feel overwhelmed, to feel despairing. We look at the scale of issues and challenges in our communities and in the world around us, and we think, how can we even hope to make a difference? And this is something that we know that folk in our community are asking as well. They are looking for signs of hope. And we know that in our community there are beautiful things happening. We know that there are hidden treasures within our communities. And there's something about, I think, who we're called to be as church, recognizing that we can't do everything. But what does it look like when we gather together and we reveal something of the gospel, something of the good news, not necessarily in the big grand gestures, but just as you said, and just as Inderjit said, in the small things that we do. And organising, faith-rooted community organising is often about the small things, us being really attentive to how we do things and what that says to other people about the good news. So signs of hope in the way that we take the time to really sit and have a conversation with someone, if we're offering a warm welcome space or a community drop-in, or even just if we're standing at the bus stop or, in the local park or in the queue at the shop. What does it mean like to begin to have conversations that deepen relationships? What does it look like when we show that we're willing not just to rush on, put an event on and for the community because we think that's what they need, but what does it mean when we say, actually, we're going to pause and listen to you because we believe that you're able to tell us something about how God is already at work in the community and we are joining in. So what it is, how we need to respond is informed by the relationships that we build and not by what we think is needed, that we're showing that we're open to that transformation. Yeah. My experience is that when we're building relationship, that we discover hope in and amongst the folk in our community that we talk to. So it renews our sense of calling and our ability to persevere when things are difficult.
Yeah. Yes. Last week, I said into the introduction, Charity spoke a lot about hope, and that tenacity, that defiance, that actually when all around seems madness, it's that deep hope that it can be better, that God needs it and wants it to be better. And again, as you was talking, it resonates with this eternal question that we constantly ask. So what is mine to do? Because there is something that each one of us is called to do.
Absolutely. I was just thinking as you were talking, so community organising isn't something that only the Methodist Church is doing. It's something that particularly if folk are working in partnership with others in their community, you may recognise these ways of working through organisations like Citizens UK, Trussell Trust, Warm Welcome, Community Organisers Limited. There are increasingly organisations are recognising that these ways of working that emerged from grassroots up, surprise, surprise, work at grassroots, they're something that people are rediscovering. But I think we bring something really distinctive as Christians into this field of work, because organisers will often talk about how we're asked to live in the reality of the world as it is, with all its challenge, joys, fragility, fragmentation, but work towards the world as it could or should be. And I think as Christians, we have a particular hope because we're living in the knowledge that the kingdom is now and not yet. So of course we're going to be able to see what we would say are glimmers of God at work in the world, little signs of hope, and that we can invite others into that space to see things from that perspective. So we learn from all kinds of organisations and folk that we partner with, but I think that we can hold that and say, actually, we have a deep-seated reason for the hope that we hold on to, and we're going to invite you in to see those signs of hope with us.
Yeah. And I like what I think I'm hearing, because again, it's what I see in my physical church in Exmouth. It's some of this is just easy. Yeah. some of this is really not difficult. It just needs you to find a way. What is it in your space? What is it in your community? So we've identified loneliness in older people within the estate that the church is centered. So what does it look like in that? In a couple of weeks, I'm trying I'm trying to teach around 30 people, older people, how to play the card game Uno. It's actually quite chaotic. I'm going to say they have a relaxed sense of how to apply the rules when we do this, but we spend 2 hours laughing. Yeah, we just, and the conversations or the opportunity for conversations. I think my faith says, no, God's already there. I don't need to take God anywhere because God's already there. And that is my hope. But I have to be attentive and be willing to engage in whatever way feels appropriate.
Absolutely. Sometimes people think, that when we're talking about community organising, we're asking them to take on some huge tasks, and we're saying to folk, well, your way in is through what we would call, I didn't come up with this name, my friend and colleague Deacon Eunice Atwood suggested, why don't we talk to people about micro-organising practices? This idea, again, rooted in our faith, something very small, this tiny seed of something that is the beginning of a change in a way of working. So what does it mean to weave in opportunities for conversation? What does it mean to start a meeting by inviting everyone to say their name and just the answer to a question that can be initially really simple? What kind of TV programme or radio programme do you like to listen to in your spare time? What a lot you learn about people through a simple question. And in time, you can go a bit deeper with your questions. What's the issue that's on your heart? When's the last time you felt just a little bit powerful? So it's little ways of bringing more voices into the space, of getting to know people, of discovering what each other's calling is, the thing that is ours to do, I think, is how we describe calling here. So not this grand sense of this is only something for, special, extraordinary people. It's for ordinary people, like me, you, all of us. There is something that we're invited into, and that we can offer. So this isn't community organising. Isn't quick. It isn't a quick fix. It isn't a 10-step program to seeing change and transformation within church community. Again, it's part of that, I think, something that's at the heart of our discipleship, this invitation to a journey that requires prayer and perseverance and a continued attentiveness to the signs of hope or the places where we need to step in and seek transformation together along the way.
Yeah. And I think sometimes... I'll ask this as a question. I think some of my fear in this is that people come with a predetermined, pre-described outcome. I'm going to do this in order that. I really struggle with that. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah. And we're so used to those ways of working, though, aren't we, Wayne, that we feel that pressure. And sometimes that pressure to work to a prescribed outcome is indeed real. There are those folk who have applied for funding know that sometimes there are very particular outcomes that you're expected to meet, or there are expectations that some of our leadership teams might have around what they think is going to happen. Sometimes they're self-imposed. We want to feel as though we have achieved something and that what we're doing is worthwhile. And I think this is an invitation, a reminder that sometimes the way that the Spirit works is unexpected. So how can we say that actually the heart of what we want is to see transformation and flourishing for one another and for our wider community? We might have a sense about what it is that our church is particularly being called to do, but then how that's shaped and what happens along the way can be beautiful and surprising and deeply challenging and transformative for us. And we need to do this together. Organising is always an invitation to work collectively. It's not something that we do on our own. We work together as a group. So we're avoiding that sense of needing to be the hero and, the cool person who goes off and does everything, which I've never been able to do. We need a team around us for that shared discernment and accountability. Again, there's our Methodist tradition coming in. As we pray and discern together around what we're hearing, what are we sensing the Holy Spirit calling us into, and what might be incredible, but actually isn't ours to do in this place and time. My former colleague at the Queen's Foundation, Gary Hall, would often invite students on placement to think about their placement church. What is the one thing that church is known for in their local community? And is that a little sign of the gospel, a little sign of the good news? And if it is, that's the thing. That's part of that church's particular calling and the calling of that group of people to consider and reflect on. Now, it could be that was something that needs to be set aside, but is that something that they're invited to journey into further? And I think that's a good way in.
Yeah, it is. So a book I'm really passionate about is called Weird Church. And again, that talks about it's based in the build up to Pentecost, which is out because we're just about to hit Pentecost. And it talks about, the disciples knew Jesus. They'd had a life and experience with Jesus. But obviously on Good Friday, that changed. And they went through that awful period where everything that they had known seemingly was just ripped away from them, had declined. Is that where some of us feel the church is now? But the people kept looking, they kept being open, the disciples kept gathering, and on the day of Pentecost, it got weird. They did things that were astonishing, that they would never have expected to do. That is the story of the early church. And for me, sometimes I think with an open heart and a trust, that's where we need to be. It's not that what we did was wrong. That's part of our history and our learning. But today, what does it look like? And it might feel a bit weird and a bit strange because we might never have done it. And it's risky. But it can be quite simple. So where are you seeing God at work, Kerry?
Love this question. I am seeing God at work when there are folks, so lay and ordained people who would call themselves leaders, people who I think are leaders but don't think that they're leaders. This is always an interesting one, are actually choosing to have the courage to give these ways of working a go, even though they can feel like a significant culture shift, even though it feels as though it's a different way for our organisation, for our churches as they are now to work. There may be ways that we used to in the past, but we've perhaps forgotten them along the way. But when folk are willing to give it a go, it's in the stories and the testimony that I'm hearing back. It's in that sense that making the small changes over time leads to a shift. So groups that meet together, seeing that folk are willing to getting used to speaking in a shared group and having their voices heard, whereas before perhaps things were more passive. I had a beautiful story lately of a presbyter in the Birmingham circuit, Karen, who was saying, I really realised that I had power in my role, and I've felt really uncomfortable talking about power because I'm called to serve and I'm called to be with and alongside others. And of course we are, but there's something about how we use our power, recognizing that all power belongs to God and in human hands can be used well or misused. But there's something about the spaces that we're invited into to step up and see that we're using our power collectively and appropriately and as a representative person. So she was invited into a meeting with a local MP who was fairly disinterested. Here's a group of people talking about, issues around poverty in the local community and lack of access to affordable food and affordable housing. And, some MPs are wonderful and very engaged. This particular one on that day and that time was not. But when it came to Karen's turn, and she said who she was and that she represented 2 Methodist churches within his patch.
Yeah.
He sat up and took notice. And for her, that was a real moment of clarity, a sense of, my goodness, I had not recognized that me representing all of these people would have such an impact, that I have this kind of relational power. So for me, there's something incredible there about people realizing, well, you know, early Methodists usually didn't have access to lots of money or status, but what they had was this collective power, and the power given to them through the Holy Spirit, as with the Pentecost, to be involved in something which is beyond what we could imagine. So that's where I'm seeing the signs of hope, this recognition that actually we have relational power, we have collective power, and we use that well with our shared discernment and our accountability. That's when change and transformation can really take place.
Yeah, and I have a deep passion for us, because again, I think our history is being in that prickly nonconformist countercultural way, and just go, okay, the world might be doing this, but that's not God's way. And God's way is of love. It's of us building together, because again, as you say, that builds momentum, that brings power, that gives us a space to go, but that's not the loving way. Like that. So is there any training or any events that people can sort of go to or get involved in?
Great question. Well, I'm still fairly new in role, so we're still developing and implementing lots of opportunities. But the opportunity I'd really recommend folk take a look at, if they're particularly interested, if you've heard what I've said and thought, oh, there's a couple of us from my church or a community project that we're doing. If you're in any way connected to Methodism, and that includes an LEP, for example, there is some free training that you can have access to. So there are currently weekend training courses hosted by Cliff College, but facilitated by myself, by my colleague Deacon Eunice Atwood, who's the Church at the Margins officer, and a fabulous Baptist colleague called Carmel Murphy-Elliott, where we talk about the practices of faith-rooted community organising in a little more detail. It's really interactive, lots of rich learning with different folk coming along. So I think the link is below. Have a book on. The only cost is travel costs. But if that's a barrier to your church or circuit, then there's a way that you can apply for support with that. Also hoping that there's going to be more locally based opportunities coming up across the year, and hopefully I'll be popping those on the Methodist website in due course.
Brilliant. Kerry, thank you for coming in and sharing with us. I hope you'll come back. I'll hope you'll just keep coming in and enabling us to understand more and to encourage us. You know, the question really is, there is something for each of us to do, and we need to keep working out what that is. So thank you. We are back again next week, where Ian Rutherford will be coming in to talk to us. So God bless everybody.